January 1945. An American battalion command post sat inside an abandoned schoolhouse near the SAR line. The telephone worked. The radio worked. The code sheet was open on the table, and Lieutenant Colonel Harlan Klein still chose the motorcycle. A black field telephone rested 3 feet from his right hand, its wire running out through a cracked window and into the snow. A radio operator sat against the far wall, headphones on, pencil ready. Outside, a courier was kicking the frozen starter of an army motorcycle, trying to wake a dead engine in the slush. Klein had just forbidden his staff from using wire or radio to warn a forward platoon that German armor was moving in the trees. He did not trust speed. He trusted paper. The order would have to travel 6 miles by road, a road the Germans had already marked with artillery. By the time that folded dispatch reached the men who needed it, the first shells would already be walking across their position. And when General George S. Patton heard why those men were left waiting, he drove straight to the schoolhouse and turned one colonel's fear of being overheard into a lesson no officer in the room ever forgot. The courier's name was Corporal Eli Ward. He was 23 years old, from Akron, Ohio, and before the war he had rebuilt delivery trucks behind his father's machine shop. He understood engines better than officers. He understood weather better than maps. And he understood something every frontline soldier learned fast. A message is not measured by how safely it is written. It is measured by whether it arrives before men die. Ward had been riding dispatch since Normandy. He had crossed French farm roads at night with blackout tape over his headlamp. He had slid through mud near Metz with a satchel full of orders and a pistol he hoped he would never need. By January, he had learned to read a road the way a sailor reads water. Fresh shell holes, new tracks, snow-packed by heavy vehicles, telephone wire hanging too low across a ditch. Those details told him what was coming before the officers finished arguing about it. That morning, he waited in the schoolyard with his gloves stiff from frozen grease, listening to the command post through the open window. Inside, Captain Martin Brigg stood beside the map table, one hand on the telephone receiver. He could hear the forward platoon commander breathing on the line. The voice from the outpost was tight, not panicked. Worse than panicked, controlled. He reported engine noise beyond the frozen orchard. He reported men moving along the hedgerow. He reported a German ranging round landing short of the barn. Brigg turned toward Klein. "Sir, Keller Farm needs the withdrawal order now." Klein did not lift his eyes from the map. "Put that receiver down." Brigg kept it in his hand. "Colonel, the line is clear. We can send it in code." Klein's pencil stopped moving. "Put it down." Brigg slowly lowered the receiver onto the cradle. The whole room heard that click. The radio operator looked away from his set. The sergeant at the stove stopped turning a wet sock over the heat. Klein straightened his wool overcoat as if neatness could turn fear into doctrine. "I will not feed the Germans my intentions over wire," Brigg said. "Sir, the platoon is exposed. If they stay at Keller Farm after the barrage begins, they will be pinned against the creek." Klein tapped the map with 2 fingers. "That is why the order must be exact. It can be exact in 30 seconds. It can be intercepted in 30 seconds, Brigg pointed to the code sheet. "Then we use the brevity code. Red Lark means withdraw to line Baker. They know it. We know it. That is why the code exists." Klein's jaw tightened. "The enemy knows we use codes, not which one for this hour." Klein folded the paper himself. One fold, then another. A small white rectangle that suddenly weighed more than every telephone wire in the room. "Corporal Ward will carry it." Briggs stared at the dispatch. "That road is already under observation. Then he will not stop." "Sir, the fastest rider in the battalion still needs half an hour if nothing blocks him." Klein finally looked at him. "Captain, you are confusing urgency with judgment." But Briggs knew the truth. The colonel was confusing silence with safety. Outside, Ward took the folded paper and slid it inside the leather pouch against his chest. Briggs leaned close and said, "Ride like the whole platoon is already counting on you." Ward looked toward the telephone wire running from the command post into the white trees. He had seen it. He knew what it meant. Then he kicked the motorcycle into gear and vanished down the frozen road. At Keller Farm, 29 Americans waited in a cluster of stone outbuildings below a low ridge. Their platoon leader, Lieutenant Paul Keene, had pulled his men into the farm before dawn because it gave them cover from small arms fire. But cover can turn into a trap. The barn faced the orchard. The creek cut off the rear. The lane back to the American line curved through a patch of open ground. If German artillery landed behind them, there would be nowhere clean to run. At 8:12, Keene called battalion. At 8:14, Captain Briggs picked up. At 8:15, Klein refused the wire. At 8:18, Eli Ward left the schoolyard. And at 8:41, the first German shell hit the lane behind Keller Farm. The blast threw ice and roof slate across the courtyard. A second round hit the orchard. A third struck the creek bank and turned the frozen mud black. Keene shouted for the men to spread out. He was still waiting for the order. He did not know battalion had already written it. He did not know the order was bouncing through shell smoke in a courier's pouch. He did not know a working telephone had been sitting beside his commander's hand when the decision was made. Ward rode hard. He cleared the first mile in 4 minutes. At the second bend, a shell burst in the ditch and kicked the rear wheel sideways. He stayed upright by luck and balance. At the old stone culvert, he found a supply truck jammed nose first across the road, its driver bleeding from the scalp and waving him off. Ward left the road. He drove through an apple field, over frozen ruts that hammered his knees into the fuel tank. The motorcycle skidded twice. The third time he went down, he hit shoulder first. The leather pouch tore loose. For 1/6 second, the dispatch lay in the snow with mud splashed across the seal. Ward crawled to it, shoved it back under his coat, and dragged the motorcycle upright. He did not curse. He did not pray. He only looked at the road ahead and kicked the starter until the engine caught again. At the schoolhouse, Captain Briggs kept his eyes on the clock. 8:30, 8:35, 8:40. The telephone remained silent because Klein had ordered it silent. The radio remained silent because Klein had ordered it silent, and the map kept changing without him. A runner from the observation post came in breathless. "German barrage on Keller Farm," Klein asked. "Is the messenger through?" No one answered. Briggs said, "We do not know, sir." Klein looked at the telephone. For one moment, every man in the room thought he would pick it up. Instead, he turned back to the map. "Then we wait for confirmation." That was the darkest part. Not the shelling, not the road, not even the trapped platoon. The darkest part was that the command post finally knew the danger was real, and the commander still preferred not knowing over being heard. Briggs sat at a typewriter in the corner and began writing the facts while they were still happening. Time of forward warning, condition of telephone line, condition of radio set, commander's refusal, dispatch sent by motorcycle, German barrage reported before delivery confirmation. He did not decorate the report. He did not accuse. He recorded. Because sometimes the only weapon left under a bad commander is a clean timeline. Ward reached Keller Farm at 9:07, 49 minutes after he left. 52 minutes after the telephone call could have been made. 26 minutes after the first shell hit the lane. He found Keene behind a stone wall with blood running down one side of his face. The lieutenant tore open the dispatch. His eyes moved over the words once. Withdraw to line Baker, before enemy artillery closes rear lane. Before, that was the word that mattered. The order was written for a world that no longer existed. Keene looked past Ward toward the barn. 2 men were missing near the orchard. 4 more were down by the cart shed. The rear lane had already been cut by shell fire. The platoon got out in fragments, moving through the creek bed under smoke, carrying the wounded on doors pulled from the farmhouse. By the time they reached line Baker, 9 men were dead. 17 were wounded. 3 were captured because they could not be moved before the German infantry reached the orchard wall. The dispatch had been perfectly secure. It had also been too late. That afternoon, the report from Captain Brigg moved up through regiment, not as gossip, not as revenge, as a sequence of times no officer could argue with. A working telephone, a usable radio, a code sheet, a commander who refused all 3, a messenger forced onto a shelled road, a platoon hit before the paper arrived. By early evening, Patton knew enough. The jeep stopped outside the schoolhouse so sharply that mud slapped across the steps. Patton stepped out in a heavy coat, helmet marked with 3 stars, pistols at his hips, snow melting on the leather of his gloves. He did not ask permission to enter. He walked through the doorway, and the staff room went still. No one saluted fast enough to make the moment feel normal. Patton moved straight to the map table. He looked at Keller Farm. He looked at the telephone. Then he looked at Klein. His voice was not loud. That made it worse. "Colonel, was that telephone in service at 8:15 this morning?" Klein said, "Yes, General." "Was your radio set operational?" "Yes, General." "Did your staff have an active brevity code for Keller Farm?" "Yes, General." Patton removed one glove finger by finger. "Did you refuse to use all of them?" Klein held his chin high. "I did, sir. Signal security was my responsibility." Patton nodded once. "What time did the German barrage begin?" "Approximately 0841. What time did your messenger reach Lieutenant Keene?" 0907. What time could the coded telephone order have been sent? Klein did not answer. Patton turned to Captain Brigg. Brigg said, "Within 30 seconds, General. 3 minutes if encoded and repeated." Patton faced Klein again. "There is your battle, Colonel. 30 seconds on a wire. 49 minutes on a motorcycle. 26 minutes of shell fire in between." Klein said, "General, the Germans monitor wire traffic. I could not risk compromising the position." Patton stepped closer. "You compromised it by leaving men in it." The room did not move. Klein's polished boots were together. His coat was buttoned perfectly. His maps were neat. His theory was intact. Only his platoon was broken. Patton lowered his voice. "Security is not a religion. It is a tool. Speed is also a tool. Judgment is knowing what keeps soldier alive in the next 5 minutes." Klein said, "A captured transmission can cost a battalion." Patton said, "So can a dead messenger. So can a silent telephone. So can a colonel who loves procedure more than consequence." Then Patton reached across the table and picked up the folded duplicate of the dispatch. He held it between 2 fingers. "This paper did everything you asked of it. It kept your words secret. It kept your hands clean. It gave you something proper to put in a file." He dropped it onto the map, but it did not move faster than artillery. Klein's face hardened. Sir, I acted according to the principles of command security. Patton looked toward the doorway, where Corporal Ward stood with dried mud down one sleeve and a torn strap hanging from his dispatch pouch. No, that boy acted. Your platoon acted. Your captain acted when he wrote down the times. You hid inside a principle after the facts had already outrun it. Patton turned to the battalion executive officer. You have command. Klein blinked. General? You are relieved. No one breathed. Patton pointed to the field telephone. Before you leave this room, you will use that instrument to send the order I am about to give. Klein stared at him. Patton's eyes did not move. You will report to regiment that you have been relieved for failure to employ available communications in a time-critical tactical emergency. Klein swallowed. Then he lifted the receiver. His hand shook just enough for everyone to see it. The same wire he had feared all morning now carried the end of his command in less than a minute. When the call was finished, Patton did not shout. He did not need to. He ordered every company commander in the battalion to maintain wire, radio, and messenger redundancy from that hour forward. No single method would be treated as sacred. No fear of interception would excuse a commander from using speed when speed was the only shield left. And every urgent order had to be logged with the time it was received, the time it was sent, and the method used to send it. Within 2 days, the battalion's forward posts were using short-coded telephone phrases for withdrawals, artillery warnings, and displacement orders. A message that once needed a courier under shell fire could now move in a handful of words. Not because wire was perfect, not because radio was safe, because war does not reward perfect silence. It rewards decisions that arrive while they can still change the outcome. Corporal Ward survived the winter campaign. He kept writing dispatch, but after Keller Farm, no officer in that battalion used him as a substitute for a working telephone unless the wires were actually cut. Captain Briggs stayed on staff and became known for writing reports so clean they made excuses impossible. Lieutenant Keene returned from a field hospital weeks later with one scar along his temple and a harder voice than before. As for Klein, he left the front under escort and never again commanded men in combat. The men at Keller Farm did not get their morning back. The dead stayed dead. The captured did not become uncaptured because a general arrived angry in the evening. That is the part stories like this can never repair. But the lesson moved faster than the dispatch had. From one schoolhouse to another. From one map table to the next. From every silent telephone to every officer, tempted to wait for the safest possible method while the battlefield changed outside his window. A commander does not protect men by protecting his own theory. He protects them by choosing the tool that reaches them in time. Because in war, a safe order that arrives after the dead are counted is not safe. It is only clean paperwork on a dirty battlefield.